Welcome to the deep dive. We got this really interesting Rolling Stone report sent over.
Yeah, it looks into Elon Musk's time, within the Trump administration.
Exactly. So what we want to do today is kind of unpack this, look beyond the headlines a bit.
Really try to understand, what were the specific concerns these White House officials had?
Yeah. What were the core issues, maybe?
Definitely, because these reports, they give you that little peek behind the curtain, don't they?
Right? Beyond the official press releases and stuff. Exactly. And it shows how even at those super high levels, personalities and just how people interact, it matters a lot.
Okay, so let's get into it then. Initially reading about Musk's involvement, it sounded like he was set up to be pretty influential.
Oh, for sure. The report uses the phrase prominent seat at the table.
Yeah, and he was leading that Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, they called it.
That's the one, DOGE, which, setting that up and putting him in charge. What does that signal really in terms of what they hoped he'd do?
Well, it signals they wanted to inject a certain kind of thinking, right? This private sector disruptor mindset.
Shake things up.
Yeah, shake things up, streamline operations, cut costs. That was the idea on paper anyway.
So a prominent seat, direct access, probably a mandate to make changes.
Pretty ambitious stuff. Yeah.
But then you keep reading the report and that picture of smooth integration, it kind of falls apart, doesn't it?
He really does. Pretty quickly, the report starts talking about this growing deep annoyance among White House officials towards him.
Yeah. Deep annoyance. It wasn't the story you might expect, like brilliant innovator revolutionizes government.
Not according to this piece, no. And that contrast, I think, is really key.
How so?
Well, it highlights that potential friction. The skills that make you a huge success in, say, tech don't always translate.
Exactly, especially not into the often very collaborative, very consensus-based world of government work. That deep annoyance suggests a real mismatch, maybe in expectations, maybe just working styles.
And the report gets specific about the annoyance. There's that quote from a senior official calling Musk the most irritating person they'd ever dealt with.
Wow, yeah, that's strong language.
Especially from a senior official, right? What jumps out about that?
Well, what's interesting is why they found him irritating, according to the report. Anyway, it wasn't policy fights, apparently. It was like his personal interaction, jokes.
Yeah. The report mentions constant kind of unfunny jokes and aides, and this perceived need for validation where it says he looks almost hurt if you don't lap up his humor.
Exactly that part. It paints this picture of someone whose, let's say, communication style just didn't mesh well there.
Right? It really underscores how important that social, emotional intelligence stuff can be.
Even if you're brilliant, technically.
Absolutely. It's not just about telling a bad joke. It's that expectation for a reaction, apparently.
And that official, they went further, saying annoying wasn't even strong enough.
Yeah. What does that tell you?
Well, it suggests it wasn't just like an occasional awkward moment, right? It points to a pattern, probably something persistent that just ground people down, creating drag on meetings, morale.
You got it. In that kind of high pressure environment, dealing with someone perceived that way constantly, it would be incredibly draining.
Okay. Then there's this other theme in the report, this idea about perceived intellectual superiority.
Ah, yes, that comes up too.
Officials saying he acted like he was smarter than everyone else in the room, even when it's clear he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
How does that land in a collaborative setting, especially in government, where you usually need lots of different experts?
Well, it's a huge potential barrier, isn't it? If people feel dismissed or like one person thinks they have all the answers, it shuts down discussion.
Totally. It stifles that open sharing of ideas, of different perspectives, and government decisions. They need input from lawyers, policy people, scientists, you name it.
So that perceived lack of humility, maybe not listening.
It could be really damaging to actually making good decisions.
Very detrimental. Yeah.
And apparently it wasn't just about feelings getting hurt. The report says Trump administration lieutenants have walked out of important meetings because of Elon Musk.
No, that is significant.
Walking out, what does that level of disruption signal?
For me, walking out of an important meeting, that signals a complete breakdown. Like things have gone past the point of being productive.
Absolutely. It means people felt staying there was just pointless, a waste of their time and energy in any organization, but especially dealing with national issues. That's a really serious indicator of problems.
And then building on that disruptive behavior, there's that pretty surprising bit about drug use speculation, right? The report mentions that some officials wondered about that.
And it's crucial, like you said, this is just speculation mentioned in the report. We need to be clear on that.
Absolutely, just reporting what the report claims they speculated.
But the fact that officials were even thinking that,
Yeah, what does that suggest about how unusual his interactions seemed to them?
it really highlights how far outside the perceived norm his behavior was, for people operating at that government level.
Right? Like they were struggling to even understand it.
Yeah, like they were grasping for explanations because it seemed so off. It just underscores how much his reported interactions deviated from what they expected professionally in that specific environment.
And then there's the nickname Crazy Uncle Elon.
Yeah.
Yeah. That apparently came from State Department officials.
Fed up State Department officials, according to the report, using it behind his back. What does that kind of informal label tell us?
Well, nicknames like that, they often pop up as a coping mechanism, right? A way to vent frustration about someone whose behavior is seen as, well, perplexing or maybe inappropriate for the setting.
Sort of signals a lack of respect.
Yeah, and a feeling that the person just doesn't quite fit the group's norms. And the fact it reportedly came from the State Department, known for more traditional protocol.
Exactly. It might suggest a particular clash between his style and that more formal diplomatic culture.
The report also singles out Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State at the time.
What did it say there?
That Rubio could barely hide his disdain for Musk.
Wow, barely hide it.
So, what does it mean when a top cabinet member reportedly feels that strongly, that negatively?
Well, it shows the negative feelings weren't just like among mid-level staffers, right? It went right to the top.
Yeah, when someone as high up as the Secretary of State is visibly struggling with their reaction, that suggests serious friction at the highest levels, which could complicate things between departments, I imagine, hinder effectiveness.
Oh, definitely. That kind of dynamic can absolutely get in the way.
And just to give a sense of maybe how widespread this feeling was, the report says at least 3 Trump admin officials spoke to Rolling Stone about all this, 3 that they mentioned specifically.
Yeah, it's not a full survey, obviously, but what's the significance of getting multiple separate accounts saying similar things?
Well, it adds weight, doesn't it? The fact that several officials, apparently speaking independently, are describing similar experiences, similar frustrations.
Yeah, it makes it seem less like maybe one person had a bad experience and more like a more common sentiment among those who worked with him there, lends more credibility to the overall picture the report paints.
Okay, so wrapping this section up then, the main takeaway from this Rolling Stone report seems to be you have Elon Musk comes in with this prominent role, high expectations, maybe way DOGE and all that.
But he ends up being seen by at least some key people inside the administration as, well, unwelcome, irritating.
Yeah, that seems to be the core of the report's claims. And the reasons cited are these attempts at humor that didn't land and this perception that he acted superior, maybe condescendingly so.
That's a good summary. I think it really becomes this interesting case study, doesn't it, about how crucial those interpersonal skills, that emotional intelligence, really are.
Exactly. His, tech genius or business smarts, which are undeniable, they didn't automatically translate into navigating those high-level government dynamics smoothly, at least not according to these officials in this report.
Which kind of leaves us with a final thought, maybe something for listeners to chew on.
Okay.
Given Musk's huge public profile, his very unique, often unconventional way of communicating, especially on social media.
Very unconventional sometimes.
How might these personal perceptions of him, both the good and the bad that people feel, how might that ultimately affect how effective his contributions can be, whether it's in government again or any other really formal collaborative space?
That's a great question to leave people with, that interplay between personality, public perception, and actual effectiveness in these high-stakes environments. It's complex.
Exactly. Something to think about.